Rain lashed against the windows, thunder rattled the old building. Daniel, a university freshman, huddled over his books. The power flickered, plunging his dorm room into darkness. He sighed, pushing his glasses up his nose. This was not how he planned to spend his Saturday night. He fumbled for his phone, its dim light a beacon in the sudden blackness. No signal, of course. Daniel glanced at the clock on his nightstand, barely visible in the darkness, almost midnight. He shivered, pulling his threadbare blanket tighter around his shoulders. The storm seemed to be getting worse, the wind howling like a banshee outside. He tried to focus on his textbook, the words swimming before his tired eyes. History had never been his favorite subject, and tonight it felt especially dry and lifeless. He jumped as another clap of thunder shook the building, the sound seeming to echo through the empty hallways. Where was everyone? He could have sworn he'd seen someone on his floor earlier. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the door. Daniel flinched, his heart pounding in his chest. He froze, listening intently. Silence. Had the wind just slammed a door shut somewhere? He tried to convince himself it was nothing, but a knot of unease tightened in his stomach. He wished he hadn't watched that horror movie marathon last night. The silence stretched, broken only by the relentless pounding of the rain. Daniel let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Must have been the wind. He tried to go back to his book, but his concentration was shot. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching him, lurking just beyond the circle of light cast by his phone. A series of slow, deliberate raps on his door shattered the quiet. 3 sharp knocks. Daniel's blood ran cold. He knew it wasn't the wind this time. No one would be out in this weather. He sat frozen, his mind racing. Who could it be at this hour, and why knock like that? Cautiously, he set aside his phone and crept towards the door. His hand trembled as he reached for the knob. Taking a deep breath, he called out, "Who's there?" His voice sounded thin and reedy in the tense silence. Only the storm answered, a fierce gust of wind rattling the windows. He waited, holding his breath, but there was no response. Just the unsettling silence, heavy and expectant. Daniel told himself it was just a prank, some late-night shenanigans from the guys down the hall. But deep down, a prickle of fear danced down his spine. Something didn't feel right. He took a hesitant step back from the door, his hand still hovering near the knob. As he did, his fingers brushed against something cold and hard lying on the floor just beside his foot. He recoiled instinctively, his pulse quickening. What was that? Bending down, he cautiously reached for the object, his fingers closing around a small metallic shape. He straightened up, bringing the object closer to his phone's dim light. It was a key, an old-fashioned key, made of tarnished silver with intricate carvings along its shaft. It looked ancient, like something out of a history book. As soon as his fingers touched the cold metal, the air in the room seemed to shift. The temperature dropped, a sudden chill that sent goosebumps erupting across his skin. The faint scent of mildew and dust, like the musty smell of an old attic, filled his nostrils. He shivered, a sense of unease washing over him. He stared at the key in his hand, its surface cold and smooth against his palm. Where had it come from? He hadn't seen it before, and there was no way it could have just appeared there. And what was with the sudden change in the room? It was as if the key had brought something with it, something dark and unseen. Another knock echoed through the room, louder this time, insistent. Daniel jumped, nearly dropping the key. His heart pounded in his chest, his breath catching in his throat. He stared at the door, his eyes wide with fear. He had the distinct feeling that, if he opened the door, something terrible would happen. "Open the door!" a voice whispered, seeming to slither through the cracks beneath the door. The voice was raspy and low, sending chills down Daniel's spine. He couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was a command filled with an unsettling urgency. Hesitantly, Daniel took a step back from the door, clutching the key tightly in his hand. He had to get out of here. He glanced around the room, searching for an escape route, but there was only one door, and the windows were sealed shut. He was trapped. A shadow flickered under the door, long and thin, like the silhouette of a tall, slender figure. Daniel watched, transfixed with fear, as the shadow seemed to stretch and writhe, growing larger as if the figure behind it was moving closer. He could feel his heart pounding against his ribs, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. He had to do something. "I have the key," Daniel called out, his voice trembling despite his attempt to sound brave. He wasn't sure why he said it. Maybe he hoped that by acknowledging the key he could appease whatever was on the other side of the door. Or maybe he just wanted to break the terrifying silence. The shadow beneath the door seemed to pause, as if considering his words. The voice spoke again, closer now, the rasping whisper sending chills down Daniel's spine. "Give me the key," it hissed, the words laden with an eerie urgency. "The key is mine." Daniel hesitated, clutching the key tighter in his hand. He didn't know why, but he felt a strange reluctance to hand it over. It was just a key, an old, tarnished key, but it felt important, as if it held some kind of power, a power he couldn't explain. He backed away from the door, his mind racing. What was he supposed to do? Who was this figure? And what did it want with the key? He wished he had someone to talk to, someone to tell him what to do, but he was alone, completely alone. "Give it to me," the voice demanded, closer now, the rasping whisper sending chills down Daniel's spine. The shadow under the door pulsed, as if the creature on the other side were growing impatient. Daniel felt a surge of fear, cold and paralyzing. He knew he couldn't hold out much longer. With trembling hands, he reached out and slowly slid the key under the door. The metal felt icy cold against his fingertips, as if draining the warmth from his body. He held his breath, listening for any sound, any indication of what might happen next. Silence. The shadow retreated, vanishing beneath the door as quickly as it had appeared. The voice was gone, the hallway outside silent except for the relentless pounding of the rain against the window panes. Daniel slowly stood up, his legs shaky, his entire body trembling with fear and adrenaline. He took a step back from the door, his eyes darting around the room as if expecting the shadowy figure to reappear at any moment, but the room was empty. The key was gone, and the only sound was the storm raging outside. He was safe. For now. As he turned to walk away, he heard it. A faint scratching sound, coming from the other side of the door. 3 slow, deliberate scratches like claws on wood. Daniel froze, his blood turning to ice. He was wrong. He wasn't safe, not at all.